Okay, hey, I am going to go over the answers or how to do the extra credit problems. In number one, it gives you the prices in year one and prices in year two, and then the quantities in year one are stated here 20, 40, and 60, and then in year two, tells you that those are just doubled. So instead of having 20, 40, and 60, you'll have 40, 80, and 120. 20 times 2 is 40. All right. So if the question is asking you if year one is the base year, when it talks about base year, when you're talking about GDP, nominal GDP is always going to be current production in current year prices. So if I were asking for nominal GDP in year one, you're going to use year one prices. If I ask for nominal GDP in year two, you're going to use year two prices. When it asks for real, the very first thing you want to do is figure out what is the base year. And the base year is whatever year you happen to pick. Like in this problem, I could have said base year of two, right? But because I said base year of one, you want to basically have quantity in year two, so two, times price in year one, all right? So if I do quantity in year two, and you want to, it's the sum of everything bought and sold, the market value. So what you end up with is two, all right? $2 coming from year one, two, times how many units of X were sold in year two. That's going to be 40 plus $4 times 80 plus $6 times 120. And that's going to give you, when you sum all of those together, and again, remember you want to make sure when you're calculating real GDP, and I didn't put this up here, you want to have the sum of everything that was produced in year two times that price in year one. All right, so when you sum all of these together, you're going to get 1,120. So what is real GDP in year two with year one, the base period? 1,120. Right? On problem number two, it's sort of a trick question. What I'm trying to get you to catch here is where does everything go? We're looking for what does consumption equal, right? Consumption is just going to be durables plus non-durables plus goods and services, right? So you want to make sure that it's going to be equal to, consumption is going to be equal to the 400 on durables plus the 300, plus the 400 on non-durables, 300 on durables. New residential spending, that does not get included in consumption. That's one of those tricky things. It gets included in investment. And spending on services, that does get included. So goods, 400 and 300 plus 500, which is going to give you a total of 1,120. I'm sorry, 1,200, right? 1,200 is the total on consumption. Number three is asking you to just calculate a growth rate. Know how to do a percentage change. Know how. All right. What I mean by know is new minus old over old. Know how. So that is new 498 minus old 487 over old, which is going to be 487. 487. When I do that, you're going to equal 11 divided by 487, which is going to give me 0.02258. To change this to a percent, you need to move the decimal over two places. That's going to be 2.2, and I'm going to round 6%. Between year one and year two, there was a 2.26% increase in GDP, which is actually kind of what the government's looking for. If you go back into the production and growth chapter, in the very beginning of the chapter, there is a chart. They are showing you what the growth has been over the last couple of years. I think the United States is somewhere around 1.77 average. So 2.26 is kind of like right there in our range. Right? Some years we're a little above 2, sometimes we're a little bit below 2. Right? On number 3, I actually asked you to work out the entire problem. So here, when you're calculating nominal GDP, you can just go across the board here. It's current production in current prices. So 10 times 120. 10 times 120 plus 12 times 200 is going to give you 3,600. And again, remember when you are doing gross domestic product, it is the market value, so P times Q, of all goods summed together. So it's not just the price of footballs or the price of basketballs. You have to add up all the quantities. All right, in year 2, it's going to be 12 times the 200 plus 15 times the 300, which will give you a total of 6,900 for nominal GDP. And then in year 3, we're going to have 14 times 180 plus 18 times 275. When you sum that together, 7,470. All right, so these are nominal GDP in year 1, year 2, and year 3. And see if you can tell, it looks like GDP has gone up every single year, right? 3,600 to 6,900 to 74. So it looks like we're obviously more productive than we are. But that's not necessarily telling us the real deal, because what could be happening, if you notice, the prices are going up from 10 to 12 to 14. So nominal GDP can go or increase simply because there's a change in price. It does not mean we're more effective or more productive. Therefore, you have to use real GDP. All right, so using year 1 as the base year, what you can do is go back here. And what I like to do, if I'm using year 1 as the base year, I often delete or scratch through the other years so that I don't get confused. All right, if this had been year 2, I would have gotten rid of year 1 and year 3. So now I know I've got 10 times 110, 20, plus 12 times 200, 10 times 200, plus 12 times 300, 10 times 180 times 12 plus 275. So real GDP in year 1, 10 times production in that year, plus 12 times 200 is going to yield me 3,600, right? No surprise there, because if I'm using the base year, the nominal and real GDP will always be equal to each other. And most importantly, the GDP deflator will always be 100, because nominal 3,600 divided by real 3,600 times 100 is 1 times 100, which is 100. Real GDP in year 2, again, you want to use year 1 prices times 200 plus 12 times, let me just move this out a little so you'll catch that. 12 times 300 is going to give me 5,600. So again, GDP has risen like it did in year over here in nominal, but by not as much. Maybe some of that increase in GDP when we're looking at just nominal or name only is because of a change in prices. All right, and number 3, again, you want to use year 1 prices, $10 times 180 plus the 12 times 275, which gives me 5,100. Now this is something definitely odd. Here it shows that nominal, when you're just looking at the numbers only, shows you that GDP increased. We are more productive. We produce more stuff. But when you look at the real GDP, you see, look, we were not more productive. In actuality, what happened was there was a change in prices, which made nominal GDP increase, but real GDP is actually lower than that. So to calculate the GDP deflator, the formula is nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100. Here I have 3,600 over 3,600 times 100, which just gives me 100. Real GDP deflator, the GDP deflator. And remember, the GDP deflator is just one of the 2 measurements we studied to measure inflation. The other one is consumer price index. Make sure you understand the difference between GDP and CPI. The book list, primarily, remember, gross domestic product looks at everything that people purchased. All right, so if people are buying chicken this year, you're going to see chicken. If people buy steak, you're going to see steak. The consumer price index is a fixed basket of goods. So there are some issues with that, because not every year people buy chicken, but the CPI will show everyone buys chicken. Another drawback is when you look at gross domestic product, it only captures things that are produced in the United States. Right? For example, if the price of automobiles, like foreign automobiles, were increasing, We would not see that in the GDP deflator because GDP deflator subtracts out imports. All right. And if you don't believe me, there's also something I posted called Is It or Isn't It in their course materials, where it just kind of asks you to go through each scenario or blurb and find out what part of, is it included or not included in GDP? And if it is, where is it included? All right. So GDP deflator for year 2, taking nominal GDP, which is 6,900, divided by real GDP that year, times 100, is going to give me 5,600, I believe. Nope, excuse me, 123.2. So GDP deflator, and this is just an index. And the book talks about what an index is, and I'll also make a thing here. All right, GDP deflator in year 3. Nominal GDP in year 1, which is in year 3, 7470, 7470, divided by 5,100 times 100. Let me get my calculator out again. 7470 divided by 5100 times 100 is going to give me 146. 146.47. Right? These are all indices. Indices are just where you are dividing something. All right. What I did not ask here is I did not ask you to calculate the inflation rate. I just realized that. The video problem did. If I wanted to know what the inflation rate was between year 1 and year 2, that's just that know how to do a percentage change. That's going to be 123 minus 100 over 100, which is just going to be, let me put this down here even though I didn't ask for it. The inflation rate between in period 1, lowercase I, that's the lowercase I, is going to be equal to 23.2%. All right, price level increased by 23.2%. Between period 3 and 2, you got 146.5 in year 3, 123.2 in year 2. So to figure out what the percentage change is there, I'm going to take 146.5 minus 123.2 divided by, this is know how to do a percentage change, new minus old over old, 123.2, which is going to give me looks like 23.3% as well. 146.5 minus 123.2, 23, let me do this. 146.5 minus 123.2. All right, 23.23 divided by 123. 123.2 is going to give me 18.91. 18.91. 18.91, which means that on average between period 2 and 3, the average price level rose 18.91%. But like I said in the other video, it doesn't mean that all prices went up. It just means that the average basket. And so like I was talking to you earlier about know the difference between GDP deflator and consumer price index. Consumer price index only looks at goods that consumers buy. So I believe there is one of the questions in the practice talks about the price of military equipment goes up. GDP would capture that. Consumer price index would not capture that because CPI only looks at what consumers buy. Make sure you know the largest components of the GDP. About 2/3, right? The biggest component of gross domestic product happens to be consumption, what consumers buy. All right, and I'll go ahead and post this in the video so that everyone can see it later. Thanks so much. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me.